Imagine you walk off your job today. No paycheck, no health insurance, just you, a handmade sign, and a folding chair on a cold sidewalk outside the building where you used to work. Now imagine doing that for 6 weeks. That is what tens of thousands of American auto workers did in the fall of 2023. They stopped showing up. They stood in the rain outside factories that were suddenly eerily quiet. And when it was over, both sides held press conferences and said they won. So who actually won? That question sounds simple. It is not, because when you look at what workers actually gained, what companies actually lost, and what quietly happened to the price of everything afterward, the real answer is stranger and more revealing than either side wants to admit. Okay, let's back up and make sure we're all working with the same understanding. A strike is not a protest. It is not workers standing outside holding signs just to make noise. A strike is a deliberate, coordinated refusal to work. Employees collectively withhold their labor, the one thing the company cannot function without, to force a negotiation. The logic is simple. A company needs workers to make things. If workers stop making things, the company stops making money. That pain is the leverage. The longer a company bleeds revenue, the more it is willing to give at the bargaining table. That is the theory. The reality is more complicated because workers bleed too. The moment they walk off the job, the paychecks stop. Union strike funds help cover a fraction of what members were earning, but most striking workers are running on fumes within weeks. Bills keep coming. Kids still need to eat. So a strike is really a test of endurance. Which side can absorb more pain before they break? And that framing right there is why nearly every strike ends the same way, in compromise. Nobody fully breaks. Both sides eventually agree to something in the middle, shake hands, and go back to work. Then each side calls it a victory. But victories have a scoreboard. Let's look at the actual numbers. Strikes are not a modern invention. The oldest recorded one happened nearly 3,200 years ago in ancient Egypt. In 1152 years before Christ, a group of craftsmen working on the royal tombs at a place called Deir el Medina put down their tools and refused to work. They were not paid. The grain rations the pharaoh owed them had not arrived. So they walked to the nearest temple, sat down, and waited. That action is recorded on a papyrus that still exists. It shows workers demanding back pay from one of the most powerful governments on earth and getting it. That is the basic shape of every strike since then. Workers stop. The powerful party feels it. Something is paid. What changed over the following 3,000 years was scale. By the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution had packed millions of workers into factories, mines, and railroads. Individual leverage disappeared. Collective leverage became the only leverage that existed. Unions formed to coordinate that leverage, and strikes became the mechanism. The United States saw some of the most consequential ones. In 1886, a nationwide push for an 8-hour workday culminated in what became known as the Haymarket Affair in Chicago, a labor rally that turned deadly and set the terms for a generation of conflict between workers and industry. By 1946, more than 4.5% of the entire American workforce was on strike at some point during the year. That number is staggering when you sit with it. Nearly 1 in 20 American workers, all refusing to work, all at once. The post-war economy that built the American middle class was hammered out through exactly that kind of conflict. All right, so how does a modern strike actually work, mechanically speaking? Workers vote to authorize a strike. If the vote passes, the union sets a deadline. If the company does not meet the workers' demands by that deadline, workers walk. They form picket lines outside the the facility, which serves two purposes. It signals solidarity and it creates social pressure for other workers, including delivery drivers and contractors, not to cross. The company, meanwhile, has options. It can negotiate, it can wait, or it can hire replacement workers, which is legal in the United States and which is one of the most explosive moves a company can make. In 1938, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called NLRB versus Mackay Radio that companies can permanently replace striking workers, not temporarily, permanently. That ruling has never been overturned. It is the reason strikes carry real risk for workers that goes beyond a few weeks without a paycheck. In theory, you could walk off your job in a legal strike and come back to find someone else sitting at your desk permanently. That happened at massive scale in 1981. President Reagan fired 11,345 air traffic controllers after they went on strike, about 74% of the entire workforce. He replaced them with military personnel and new hires. The strikers were banned from federal employment for years. Their union was dissolved. That's crazy. A sitting president dismantled an entire workforce in one decision, and wages across American industries softened for the rest of the decade as a result. The lesson companies took from that moment: the threat of replacement is real. The lesson workers took: so is the cost of losing. Fast forward to the fall of 2023, and you have one of the most carefully engineered strikes in American labor history. The United Auto Workers Union, led by a man named Shawn Fain, launched what they called the stand-up strike against Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, the three largest American automakers, all at once. But they did not shut down everything at once. They shut down one factory here, one warehouse there, rotating the pressure unpredictably so the companies could not prepare. The union called it a stand-up strike. The companies called it a nightmare. At its peak, hundreds of thousands of work hours were gone. Assembly lines that normally run around the clock went silent. Dealerships started rationing inventory. Parts suppliers downstream started laying workers off because there were no cars to supply parts for. The companies lost money every single day. Ford alone saw its earnings estimates drop by over $1 billion during the work stoppage. Across all three automakers, total losses hit $10.4 billion. And workers, they went without full paychecks for weeks. Strike fund payments from the union covered a portion of what they were earning, but not all of it. Families stretched budgets. Medical benefits were on the clock. After roughly 6 weeks of negotiations, deals were reached. Workers won significant wage increases, in some cases over 25% phased in over the contract period. Wage tiers that had created two classes of workers at the same factories were eliminated. Pension improvements were secured. Shawn Fain stood in front of cameras and said workers had won a historic victory. Ford, GM, and Stellantis executives said they had protected the long-term health of their companies. Press releases flew in both directions. Now let's look at what actually happened. Here is the hidden scoreboard. Workers gained real measurable things. The wage increases were not symbolic. A 25% raise phased over 4 years means a meaningful difference in take-home pay for hundreds of thousands of families. The elimination of wage tiers meant newer workers would no longer be paid less for doing the same job on the same line as someone hired years earlier. Those are genuine wins, the kind that take generations to claw back if they are ever lost. But companies did not simply absorb those costs. They passed them forward. Estimates put the added labor cost at somewhere between $850 and $900 per vehicle manufactured. That cost went somewhere. It went into sticker prices. The consumer, the person who eventually buys the car, quietly absorbed a portion of those negotiated wage increases without ever voting on them, without ever walking a picket line, and without getting any of the credit. Then came the layoffs. Stellantis cut more than 1,300 permanent positions. General Motors and Ford between them announced around 900 more. The companies framed these as business decisions, not retaliation. And technically, they were both things at once. And then the longer play began. Every major automaker accelerated investment in automation after the strike. Robots do not strike. They do not ask for pension improvements. They do not need health insurance. When labor becomes more expensive, capital looks for ways to reduce its dependence on labor. The 2023 strikes gave every boardroom in Detroit a very clear incentive to speed that process up. So here is the honest accounting. Workers gained wages and dignity in the short term. Companies absorbed losses, then restructured costs, passed some to consumers, and began reducing their reliance on workers over the long term. The consumers paid more. Some workers who weren't even involved lost their jobs, and the factories started looking more seriously at replacing humans with machines. That's crazy, right? The workers who stayed won more money, and the act of winning accelerated the conditions that could eliminate their jobs down the road. So who really wins a strike? Let's be precise about this, because the answer depends entirely on your time horizon. In the short term, nobody wins cleanly. Workers lose wages they never fully recover. Companies lose revenue they can partially offset. Suppliers and small businesses near the affected factories absorb collateral damage they had nothing to do with. In the medium term, workers who keep their jobs are genuinely better off. Higher wages are real. Better conditions are real. Contracts that define how workers are treated have teeth. Labor history is littered with examples of working conditions that would be unrecognizable today because of strikes. The 8-hour workday, the 40-hour week, overtime pay, employer-provided health insurance, paid leave. These did not arrive as gifts from generous corporations. They arrived because at some point, workers decided the pain of striking was less than the pain of not striking. In the long term, the picture blurs, because every dollar gained in a settlement is a dollar the company finds a way to manage. Sometimes that means higher prices, sometimes it means layoffs, sometimes it means moving operations to lower cost places where unions are weaker or non-existent, and increasingly it means automation. The deeper truth is this: strikes do not redistribute power permanently. They adjust the terms under which two sides continue doing business together. Workers get a better deal. The company figures out how to run on that deal. Both sides reset, and the pressure begins building again. This is not ancient history. In 2025, around 306,800 workers participated in major strikes across the United States, a 13% increase from the year before. That number is rising, not falling, even as union membership as a share of the workforce has dropped to under 10%. Workers in healthcare, education, and tech are organizing in ways that would have seemed unusual 20 years ago. Gig economy workers, drivers, delivery contractors, app-based freelancers are finding new ways to apply collective pressure even without traditional union structures. And the dynamics remain exactly what they have always been. Workers have one source of leverage. They can stop working. Companies have one source of leverage. They can survive longer without those specific workers than those workers can survive without that specific paycheck. The side that endures longer gets more at the table. What has changed is the audience. Every major strike today plays out publicly in real time. Social media turns picket lines into national conversations. Public sympathy can shift negotiating pressure in ways that were not possible when labor conflicts happened mostly off camera. Yeah, the strike is still the same instrument it was in ancient Egypt. The stage has just gotten much bigger. So when a strike ends and both sides walk to their separate microphones and claim victory, they are both telling a version of the truth. Workers win something real. Companies restructure around it. Consumers pay a quiet tax on the outcome. And somewhere in a corporate planning meeting, someone pulls up a slide showing the cost per hour of a robotic assembly arm compared to a human one. Strikes are not about winning and losing in the way a sports match is. They are about recalibrating who gets what from the value that labor produces. And that recalibration is never finished. It just resets to a new baseline, holds for a few years, and then the pressure builds again. The Egyptian tomb builders who sat down 3,000 years ago and demanded their grain, they got paid. The story ended there for them. But the question they were really asking has never been answered once and for all. How much of what workers create actually belongs to the people who create it? Every strike since then has been an attempt to answer that question. And every settlement has been a temporary agreement to disagree. If this video gave you a clearer picture of how strikes actually work, consider subscribing. We cover the history of money, power, and the systems that quietly shape how wealth moves through the world. There is a lot more to explore.